many, many years, not just in our country, but globally. A lot of studies have been done about Black women's hair and really kind of the discrimination that a lot of us face because of how we look and our hair being one of those things. And Malika, I want to start with you. Just for, there was a lot of debate around the reaction to what we called racism in that ad, but not so much, I think, about the racism itself. What is it that, in your view, you believe that advert was an expression of, and really kind of how do we deal with it, in terms of characterizing it as what it is?
So I think that's a very profound question, Nwabisa, because it's not just a question about the reaction that people have been speaking about as being violent, as being, a reaction of, people have termed, the EFF, for example, as hooligans and so on. And I think that's very deeply problematic, right? Because it does not speak to the systematic violence, right, that informed that kind of a reaction. And I say systematic violence because the issue of the Clicks ad is not just an ad about, Black women's hair being called damaged and so on, right? That is simply an expression or a symbol of a much greater systematic violence that is visited on the bodies of Black women and Black people in general, right? The reason why an ad like that could have even been flighted on any website is precisely because South Africa has normalized a society, or a reality rather, in which Black people are deemed as non-being, right? It is so normal that Black people are viewed as dehumanized and decivilized that saying something like that about Black women's hair is simply an expression of a system that anyway treats Black people like they are damaged and unpalatable people, right? It is not a far stretch of the imagination that a country where Black people are held on the margins of existence, where Black people are thrown into squatter camps, where Black people are denied access to economic opportunities, access to a wide range of opportunities, would be viewed as people who are damaged and their hair is damaged. It's our hair first, and then it's our skin, and then it's this and this, and then it's our bodies and so on. So it was just about the hair, but it's not really only about the hair. The bodies of Black women have also been put on trial over many times. Bodies of Black women are put on trial, right? Our bodies are not good enough. There's something fundamentally wrong with us and so on. So the issue of the Clicks hair advert, for me, is an issue that needs to be really, we need to, engage it with all its nuances and to understand it not just as an attack on the hair of Black women, but on the attack on the very existence and the very humanity of Black women in our country and across the world.
Thanks, Malika. Nyagi, one of the things I think you guys at Natural Hair Company, one of the things that I found quite profound, was that you were saying you decided to basically start this company, what I call a movement. You decided to start this movement because you really realized that a lot of hair products that cater to natural hair, our hair in its natural state, only kind of came into the market about 3 or 4 years ago, very recently, which to me speaks to a much deeper fundamental issue of, what we were expected to do until then. Why did you guys start this movement? And really kind of what are the sentiments that sparked it?
So I don't think we started the movement. I think we were just there when, I don't know what happened, but there was a shift in Black women's minds around 2013, 2014, where Black women were just like, you know what, we've had enough. And it could be because of research that was coming out around relaxers. Personally, I had a very bad experience with relaxer, which is why I stopped relaxing my hair. And when I started looking for alternatives, then it was, wait, hang on, there's nothing out there. How is that possible? And it wasn't possible because I realized, I was 26 years old. I realized that I didn't know what my hair texture was. And when I started speaking to other people, they didn't know either. It was just like, what do you mean you want to go natural? Like, I don't understand, So it was a very obscure thing. And it still is a very obscure thing. And so we started the company to firstly address the obscurity of it. Like, actually, it's not obscure. It's actually very normal. And so, our mission and our vision is to make natural hair normal, which was very funny when the Clicks ad came. And I was like, you see, this is what we've been talking about. Because people didn't understand. It was like, hair is normal. It's like, no, it actually isn't. It's a very obscure, very out there thought. You don't talk about hair, you talk about natural hair. And it's not, it's just hair. It's the hair that Black women have. And so that's why we started the company, because we realized that there was a link between, firstly, the information, but also access to the product, to the services, and to the greater part of the community and the conversation that was being had around natural hair. Because as Malaka is saying, right, it's not just about the hair that it grows out of your scalp. There's a conversation that comes out of it that somehow invokes a feeling either in yourself or in other people, right? Some for whatever reason, the hair that grows out of your scalp seems to upset people, or make them uncomfortable, or whatever feelings that invokes. That's kind of what brought up the formation, I guess, of this community.
Yeah. Prof, if you would come onto the screen, what both Malaika and Nyagi are saying is really, I share those views, and it's views that about who we are. It's not natural hair; it's just hair that comes out of of our scalp, and that's basically how what it is. Do you think, though, before we talk about the research that you've done, do you think that there is perhaps a subliminal, perhaps unintended message that we ourselves as Black women communicate when we try to change either the texture of our hair, or we basically try to put on wigs, weaves, and etc. A lot of us have been accused of that. Do you think that there is a message that we're communicating that ourselves we feel that we're not good enough?
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Focus. Yes, I think I have two views actually. So, and I think my opinion will be more from an academic and scientific aspect, not really based on emotions or what people think, but it's my personal view. Sure. So the first opinion, well, it's not even an opinion, it's a factual point that African hair is dry. African hair is kinky. It forms knots. It therefore makes it very difficult to manage. So what people do to try and manage the hair is to relax the hair. But that's not good enough. The relaxers damage the hair. We know now that there are a number of ways of styling our hair that will make it easy for us to comb and manage on a daily basis. That is, you have your natural hair, but you're able to maintain it by using the right products, the right styling equipment, as well as using the correct styles. By the way, even if people have natural hair and they haven't used chemicals, they will still lose their hair if they pull their hair. There's something we call traction alopecia, which means injibaba in African language, where most women lose their hair on the hairline. And you will see that it's mainly women who have this hair condition, because it's us who manipulate our hair frequently, be it changing different hairstyles, pulling it, adding a whole lot of other things to enhance beauty, or to actually signify who you are and how you feel about yourself, which I respect. So the second point is about the second question that you asked about weaves, about the clicks advert. It has been shown scientifically that the use of weaves, as well as artificial or synthetic hair, damages hair, because weaves have dyes, they've got chemicals that have been used, and when you attach the wig or weave or synthetic hair to your hair, you either be pulling the hair or using glues, a whole lot of chemicals that actually are going to add damage to the already fragile, dry, and very vulnerable hair. And our hair tends to be less oily compared to Eurasian hair. I'll refer to Eurasian, to European, and Caucasian or Asian hair. So it needs more tender, loving care, more moisturizing and less washing. Washing your hair once a week is actually adequate. So if I were to refer back now to the advert, the Clicks advert, it is possible that the way we wear our hair will actually encourage marketing companies or companies that make these products to actually gear their adverts towards that, because you ask yourself, why are we wearing artificial hair? Why are we not our hair in its natural form? Many times, patients that I speak to, I will, spend time and explain to them how wigs, how synthetic hair damages our hair. And the reason, the response would be, oh, I don't have time in the morning to do my hair. I just put on the weave. Then I'll show them pictures of patients who have actually lost their hair permanently, and there's nothing that they can do. And right now we're doing a research to see the effect of wigs and weaves on African hair. So that would be my response to your question.
Sure. Let me actually come back to that, particularly the science of it. But I want to go to Malaika. You know, Malaika, when that ad came out, and obviously a lot of people were angry, and were angry for good reason. And then I kept on seeing there was a sort of a narrative, particularly from men. And this narrative was like, yeah, but you guys wear weaves and whatever, you guys hate your hair. And so my natural response was, no, but we've got a choice, and we do have a choice. So, ungenapi, type of thing. And I actually thought for a moment, okay, let me stop, kind of not be emotional, take myself out of this, and really kind of think, is there even merit to that argument, that by doing so, you show an expression of self-hate?
I think that should be...
Sorry, Prof. Apologies, Prof. I'm asking Malaika. I'll come back to you just now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. It's fine. So by the way, just as a side, Nwabisa, I don't think that it should be a thing that we qualify when we make arguments, be it about issues around natural hair or anything else, that we need to qualify that we are not being emotional, right? I think we need not qualify that. I don't think the political is personal and the personal is political. Anything that is political is bound to inspire some degree of emotion in us. And I don't think it's unreasonable or childish or infantile for Black women or Black people or anyone really to make arguments, logical or otherwise, and employ some degree of emotion. So I'm very political in my arguments. I'm a geographer, so I'm very scientific, but I'm also very emotional, and I own it very deliberately. Now, to go back to your question, in 2008, a researcher by the name of Thompson in the States did a study, right, trying to understand why is it that Black women, what are the feelings of Black women on the issue of relaxing hair, right? Is it something that is done because we've got self-hate and all of that? She was basically trying to debunk this notion, or to make sense of this notion that Black women relax their hair because it is about, wanting to assimilate into whiteness and so on. And I want to quote just a one sentence from that study that I found very interesting, and I will unpack that shortly. Now, Thompson argues that it is also the relaxing of hair is also to serve to counter-politicize the signifier of ethnic and racial devalorization and challenge the definitions of Blackness as defined by hegemonic culture, right? Now, I found that to be quite very interesting for me, right? Before I even get into whether or not I agree with it, I found that to be quite very interesting, because Thompson argues that there's a hegemonic culture that seeks to
I think we may be losing Malaika there. Malaika, can you hear us? We'll come back to her shortly. Let me throw a question to Nyaki. Now, everybody knows, if you're on the chat, you do know you're more than welcome to join this conversation by placing your questions on the YouTube chat that we're on, or any platform that you are watching us from. Now, Nyaki, I want to throw this question to you, because I think it's something that you had mentioned, the very idea of calling it natural hair. when it's actually something that, you know, is just who we are. There's no kind of qualification to it. So there's a question here from Karen, who says, let's just kind of unpack that. I mean, does it communicate anything? So are we kind of saying to ourselves, you know, there's hair, there's normal hair, and then there would be like natural hair? What is kind of the sentiment behind even the reference to natural hair? Nyake, do you want to take this one?
Yes, sure. So I think what's happened is, and you know, when the Clicks, when this Clicks advert came out, I think I woke up to like 27 DMs and 9 missed calls, and people were upset, and you know, we're like, what do you think about this? And the issue that, like, the immediate response was, of course this happened, right? Because firstly, the people that are engaged in the marketing and in the language and in the comms are not people that look like us. They're not people that understand what's going on. But they are also under pressure from you guys, the politicals and the, you know, the Black women, to fit the diversity and the transformation, right? So we get a marketing brief, and it says we need to have, you know, it needs to be transformed, because if we have all white women, then you guys are going to complain. If we're going to have all Black women, then it's not going to be like, you know, why can't we be seen with, so it was 2 white women and 2 Black women. It's a tick box exercise, right? And so I think what happens is, in the culture of trying to be inclusive and trying to be diverse, we miss the personal. And I think this is what Malika was trying to get at, is that you know, the reason the language is so offensive and is so you know, cause so much abrupt is because the language that's been used traditionally has always been negative towards our hair. So we know that when they're talking about natural hair, like, when they're talking about normal hair, if you pick up a shampoo in Clicks, you know, race-free, identity-free, it's a shampoo and it says normal hair. You're going to look at it and you're like, no, this is not for me. Why? Yeah. Because we've been conditioned that normal hair is the straight, wavy, blonde, brunette. You know, it's not my hair. My hair, for whatever reason, has always been marketed, has always been labeled as dry and as damaged and as brittle and dull. And those are the issues, you know, to Prof's point, those are the issues that Black women's hair faces, right? We don't have oily hair. There's very few products out there that are going to address oily hair, or, you know, non-dry hair that's too elastic or whatever. So the issues that we do have are that we have dry hair, we've got brittle hair, we've got thirsty hair. And so the language and the comms that needs to be around that, and that's what's been missing, right? Is that those words, when painted by a Clicks, become very offensive because it's not normal. You already know that, no, they're not talking to us, because they know, they've already said that the blonde lady is normal, therefore my hair is something else. And so I think that's where the acceptance of this natural hair comes from, where we're like, okay, let's embrace, since for whatever reason our hair is not normal, because we know if we pick up a shampoo, it's not for us, but we have this natural hair because it associates the texture. When you talk about natural hair to someone, you kind of understand that you're talking about hair that is chemically free, or that's chemical free, that is an afro, or that's in locks, or you know, some sort of chemical free process. And you know that no matter what they put on the product, even if they can say for dry natural hair or for dull natural hair, like the fact that they've used the words natural is the association that we have. And I think as Black women, we've taken comfort to say that this is the language that we've chosen to associate the positivity of our hair. Yeah. And I think this is the marketing thing, unfortunately. It's unfortunate that the Clicks thing, and my response literally was, I mean, oh, okay, it happened, and it'll happen again to another brand. Like, it's happened before, it will continue happening, because brands, marketers, comms, agencies are under pressure to be inclusive, because otherwise you guys complain. But without the diversity of, you know, without the transformation in the room, these things will continue happening, right? The fact that Nwabisa wasn't in the room to say, you know, I'm not sure if we should put the word normal on this white lady's hair. Maybe let's switch them around. Because if they were switched around, then it would have been perfectly fine, right? If the one was dry and damaged, the black lady's hair was dry and damaged, but the other black lady's hair was normal, nobody would have said anything, right? It's the fact that the positive words were associated to this picture and the negative words were associated to this picture. Regardless of the fact that our hair is dry and it is dull, and we do need products for the dry and for the brittle. So I think that for me is like the overarching conversation, in that, you know, Malika, I think before she got disconnected was going to touch on it, is that hair, yes, in its physical form is an amazing thing. You know, it has certain it needs certain care, but the language that we are bringing towards our hair and the feelings and the emotions that it brings around is kind of the conversation that is driving, you know, the outrage. Because brands do this all the time. They make these kind of mistakes and we kind of brush it over because we're like, here goes another one. It's white people. They don't know what they're doing.
It is. Let me come in there. Nyagi. I think and perhaps I'll throw this question back to Malika before we were interrupted. It was probably something that she was going to speak about. That language, it doesn't come from nowhere, though. So that language, Malika, if you want to take this one and perhaps just pick up briefly from where you left off, it actually doesn't come from nowhere. Whether it is, somehow there is a percentage of being deliberate, in what is being said. Am I correct?
So, Nwabisa, it's not just a question of it being deliberate, right? It's it being also very targeted. It's deliberate and it's very targeted, right? And it also isn't a mistake, by the way. It isn't a mistake, right? It is not possible that in South Africa in 2020, you are going to put an advert like that and say you have made a mistake when literally just 3 years ago, young girls at historically white institutions, high school girls, by the way, 15-year-old, 14-year-olds, took to the streets in protest against that very language, right? Against the very discrimination of the hair of Black women. You cannot then say 4 years later that you made a mistake. This conversation has been ongoing. This is not a new conversation in South Africa. It has always been ongoing, and there's no brand that can sit here and claim or plead ignorance. It's not acceptable, right? But I mean, for me, Nwabisa, one of the things that I also find very curious, and I was going to say this even in my just before I was unfortunately disrupted with my network, is that we are very comfortable, right? So when Black women, for example, want to put on weaves on their head, or when Black women, and take the scientific argument about whether weaves damage the hair or not, and so on, and I think it's a valid study. Prof will take us deeper into that, and I don't at all dispute the findings that she would make. She's qualified and she knows what she's talking about. But let's move away from the idea. Now let's talk about the fact that when Black women want to put on weaves, when Black women want to put anything on their hair, synthetic, dye their hair, whatever the case may be, right? We always go back to the question of when Black women do it, it's a problem. They don't love themselves, they hate themselves, it's self-hate, it's this and that and all of that, right? Yet when white women do things that are associated with Black women's hair, right? If white women do Bantu knots, if white women do cornrows and so on, they become celebrated. Very recently, Adele did Bantu knots and so on. And at some point, I remember Kylie Jenner as well, one of the Kardashian sisters, did an ad, and she was actually, I think it was on the cover of Vogue or one of those other very, very, renowned magazines. And she had Bantu knots, and it was said how beautiful she is, how exotic, how all of these things, right? It was made very romantic. It was presented as being very romantic and very beautiful. But this is happening in the same America where literally just a year ago, 2 years ago, in fact, in 2018, a woman called Chastity Jones was hired by a company, right? And when they found out that she had dreadlocks, they rescinded the job offer, right? It was a case that even went the NAACP legal department took this case all the way to the Supreme Court in America, which declined to hear this case for reasons it never provided. But the point that I'm trying to make is this, that when Black women want to be experimental with their hair, when Black women want to play around with their hair in any way, it is deemed problematic, it is policed, it is problematized. Yet the same thing, when it's done by white women, is celebrated. It's seen as being bold and radical and beautiful, and it's put on front covers of magazines. So that is where I'm saying that this is not just an issue of it being deliberate, and it's not just an issue about about the hair of Black women. It is an issue about the very humanity of Black women, about the things that are acceptable when done by others and not when done by us. And this then tells you that this is not a debate about hair alone. This is a debate about the place of Black women and the refusal to acknowledge the autonomy of Black women, and the refusal to also acknowledge that if Black women want to wear their hair red, I've got my hair red, and it is an issue if it's Malaika who does it, but if it's a Black woman, a white woman who decides to do dreadlocks, it really isn't an issue. And that tells you, therefore, that we are not having a discussion about hair here. We are having a discussion about the bodies. We're having a discussion about the minds, the autonomy, and the very humanness of Black women.
Absolutely. Doc, I want to bring you here. And I mean, you've done studies really into, as a dermatologist, we've done studies into our hair and the diseases perhaps that kind of come at times that we inflicted with at times. And recently you guys made that breakthrough where you found, some of the reasons why there may be hair loss. I'm probably one of those people, hair loss, particularly on the crown of your scalp, which is a very, very painful thing, not physically, but it's just emotionally painful to have to deal with that. Just take us through very briefly on that research, what you found, and really what it means, for our hair and our looks just generally.
Thank you, Fogasi. Yeah, before I go there, I actually do share some of the sentiments of the panels. Nyaki spoke about the marketing individuals. I just want to comment on that and the fact that, being non-inclusive in, when adverts marketing people are involved, it is problematic, because if it's one particular ethnic group, they will always see things in a different way. So it's important to be inclusive, and they could have asked African or Black, people who are in marketing about the advert and get their opinion. And as Nyaki mentioned, that, that individual would have said, you know what, you can't refer to this hair like this because this and that. And then the advert could have been corrected before it was publicized. So it's important when you're talking about a group that you are not familiar with to you consult and get opinion from other, for the people who know more or were experts in that area. I think Malaika also makes a good point about, the deep underlying issues, socio-political issues surrounding the issue of Black hair and what they do, and other ethnic groups being celebrated when they do this. There's a lot of that. So I think for me, it's a multiplicity of factors. It's not just one aspect of it that we have to look. It's a social aspect, it's a political aspect, it's a racist aspect, and also, of course, factors that are indigenous in terms of how our hair is and naturally is. So yeah, it's important that we raise these things, because if we don't talk about them, then it will never stop. People have to think twice before they utter statements about issues or areas that they are not certain about. So going back to your question about the research, yes, the research that we did, there was a collaboration between myself and colleagues from the US and Israel. And, during my clinical observation, I found that most African patients were losing their hair, over here on the crown. And most people were referring to this as androgenetic alopecia, or what they call female pattern hair loss, or rather, Zulu impandla. So they would refer to this as impandla. And it turned out that, again, 50 years ago, the cause of this condition was actually attributed to use of the hot iron to relax hair. Some of you may remember your grandparents or aunts, they used to straighten their hair using the hot comb. And that was what they attributed this type of hair loss to. And I was just fascinated to see that as I was seeing patients, some of the patients had natural virgin hair and they had not used anything, no relaxers, no chemicals, no braiding, and no hot combs, and yet they had hair loss in this area. So I started examining the families, and I found that, wow, some of my patients, I think we had about 30 families. Some of the patients, they had relatives or daughters or mothers who also had hair loss. So I started calling them and examining them and doing biopsies, taking a piece of scalp to find out what it is. And then lo and behold, we found that it actually is occurring in individuals in the families who've never used anything. So the whole outlook had to change now, and the hypothesis had to change that this is actually caused by environmental factors, being the hot combo chemicals. And then we started doing research, doing the genetics, and we found that there was it's called the PAD-D3 gene that was associated with this type of hair loss, which we label as central, centrifugal, cicatricial alopecia, CCCA. Central because it occurs on the crown, centrifugal because it spreads peripherally, cicatricial because it is scarring. Once you've lost your hair, it won't come back, and alopecia just refers to hair loss. So that's the fine.
Well, is it something that is reversible?
A good question. Unfortunately, it's not reversible. However, the extent of the disease and the progression of the disease and its severity can actually be aborted or minimized if we look after our hair properly and we avoid pulling, the traction, tight braids. Some people think when you've got dreads, that's natural hair. But in actual fact, when you have your dreads styled in updos and very tight, you can get a non-marginal traction alopecia. So once you have the condition, you have it, but we do have treatment to abort it from progressing and also at least keep your hair still, covering the scalp.
I hear you, Prof. Dreads, I do think, though, Prof, are definitely, natural hair, if you want to use the word natural. But I think talking about that, I mean, one of the things, and if I may bring you in here, Nyaki, one of the things that conflict us a lot is it's particularly very systemic, and what is the policing of, what I believe is the policing of hair in schools. So how young people, in South Africa, girls especially in South Africa, have to deal with, systems that are set out that says your hair must look a certain way and it cannot be. As a parent, what do I say? So my daughter comes home and says, this is what their school said about my hair. Where do I start? What do I say?
So I think it's very unfortunate that these things happen. But I also would like to highlight that I know, as I know, white people are horrible. They've done horrible things to us, and they will continue to do it. But I do want to highlight that this is not an issue that only happens in white schools. I've had many cases where it's happened in Black schools, in Black rural schools, in the Eastern Cape, where learners have reported that they're not allowed to have locks. They have to have a brush cut. I mean, of rural schools where the girls can only ever have a brush cut, for example. So I just want to pin the aggression of white people. Yes, they are to blame, but I think a lot of it has to do with our upbringing and the idea of what I want to say civilized, but what neat looks like and what proper looks like and what prim looks like, right? So Nwabisa, your hair is wild. Like you feel like, for whatever reason, you feel uncomfortable being in a professional setting. And that's because of the way that we've been conditioned, because our grandmother said it's not tidy, because our mother said it's not tidy. So there is that conditioning to say, traditionally, and I can revert everything back to apartheid. The pencil test basically was the determiner of whether you were classified as a good citizen or a bad citizen. And good citizens had straight, neat, kept hair, and bad citizens had Nwabisa's hair or Prof's hair or Nyaki's hair, right? So there is that cultural association with trying to fit and trying to be normal and trying to assimilate into a culture and to a system that made you acceptable. So I think that for me is where I believe personally, obviously, that kind of culture and that kind of thinking comes from, because it's not only white people. We know, colored girls have it. I think they have it the worst as well, because they'll go home and then their grandmothers are like, when are you doing your hair? It's like my hair is perfectly fine the way it is, but they mean like, when is it going to get straightened? When is it going to get, we have that as Black people, like, how Nwabisa, what's going on? When are you doing your hair? So I think like in terms of schools, the conversation needs to be had. We need to have a broader conversation with school bodies and school committees. I think it's obviously a huge discrimination case when, white kids can have their hair this length, but Black girls can't have their hair this length. When Black boys, the rules are very different. And I think what happens is that we try and I think this is maybe where the homogeneous society comes into, where we have a certain set of rules and all of those rules must apply to to everyone. And that is where the discrimination and that's where we fall short as a society, because you can't say that, Nwabisa, your hair has to be whatever, 10 centimeters long, but John's hair can be 10 centimeters long, because John's hair 10 centimeters long is in his face, but your hair is still like, it's packed, it's packed neatly, it's tight, it's tightly to your face. So I think it's just as a parent, I think it's the interrogation of the standardization of rules where one size doesn't fit all, right? It's the same thing of saying, when you go to school, your pants or your skirt must be 4 centimeters above your knees. That's appropriate if you're thin and you're lean, but if you aren't, then your skirt, it needs to be a little bit longer sometimes. And so I think it's this one size fits all that as South Africans we've tried to play into because our society is so diverse. Yeah.
Malaika, I once spoke to a colleague who said it's not, when that protest was happening at Pretoria Girls High, who said it's not racism, it's just the rules. And I looked at him like, okay, do you want to take that? I mean, there are people who actually will say, but it's not, there's nothing to do with race, it's just the rules. I mean, how do we engage with that?
It's interesting that you asked this question, because I just actually jotted down what Unyagi had said, and I wanted to respond to that, right? He says that, it's the standardization of, speaking about the standardization of rules. But here's the point that we are missing, right? That the standardization of rules is not neutral, right? Rules is what is normative, right? Rules is what we say is normal, right? What we say is normal, what is the norm? And it takes us back to the, the very heart of this conversation about the clicks ad, right? The idea of what constitutes as normal is embedded in white normativity, right? It is embedded in white normativity to say, your hair must be tied in a, it's a standard rule that hair must be tied in a bun, right? The idea that all our hair can be elastic enough to be tied in a bun is not just a standard rule that applies to everybody. It is a rule that is embedded in the white normativity. What is white normative? The idea that white people's hair is elastic and it grows down. So my hair grows out, right? It does not grow down, it grows out. So I remember when I was in primary school, and I find it very curious, that the kind of struggles that students are having in South Africa in 2018 were the struggles that I was having in a school when I was in primary school in 2003, 2004, right? Which was also this issue that says, Malaika, your hair, it's all over the place. You need to grow your hair properly and all of that. But the idea of hair that is proper, the idea of hair that grows normal, a rule that is normal, is not neutral. The idea that, what we choose to standardize is not a neutral issue. It's also very deeply political. It's deeply, and in South Africa, also very deeply racial, right? Why is it that the normal, for example, why is it that the normal for hair is that it must be able to be tied in a bun, and that the normal is not that hair must be able to grow out wild? Why is it? So we need to ask ourselves, why is it that is normal? Why is it that is the standard? And the minute you've got a standard, Nwabisa, you are saying that there is something that is a yardstick and everything else on the outside is a non-something, right? And so, for example, if one of the arguments I've always held about my problem with the word non-white, referring to Black people as non-white, is that you say whiteness as a standard, and everything else that falls under it is deviating from that, right? It's non-something. So this is the standard, and this is non-something. It's a deviation of that, and that is what the idea of standard rules is about. That which you say is the standard is white normativity, and everything else out of that is something that is a deviation from that, right? And for us to be able to then have this standard, we all need to assimilate into that which is whiteness. And I just want to touch very quickly on something. The argument about Black people are also the ones that choose, to have this hair because we say it's problematic and so on. It is not a choice that is born merely in a vacuum, right? There is an entire history that informs why there is a thinking like that, even in Black society. And I want us to take it back to the United States, because at least the United States has got a longer history of doing research and documenting the experiences of Black women with hair more than any other nation, really. In South Africa, we do have this conversation, but not a lot of academic and intellectual work has gone into the study. Now, I just want to touch briefly on two things, Nwabisa. In the 1700s, in the state of Louisiana, right, in the United States, Black women would wear their hair in very elaborate and very beautiful, hairstyle, kinky, if you would say, and so on and so forth, right? And then in order, and they gained a lot of attention for that, because it was beautiful, it was endearing and so on. And in order for that excessive attention to be diminished, right, the governor of Louisiana at the time in the 1700s, the governor of Louisiana was a guy called Don Esteban. That man enacted what we in America are now called the Tignon laws, right? Now, the Tignon laws are laws that required that Black women needed to wear a scarf or a handkerchief on their head in order to hide that hair, right? But also to indicate that they belong to a slave class, because when Black women have got their beautiful hair as a crown and so on, it made them look very sophisticated and very beautiful. So if they wear this chiffon on their head or the scarf, it also indicated not only that they must hide the hair, but also that they are part of a slave class. So it was an issue about hair, but also an issue about putting Black women in their place, right? But now let's take it back to the issue around, so the Tignon laws are legalized, rather legislated in the 1700s. It was only last year, by the way, Nwabisa, in the United States, firstly in the state of California and secondly the state of New York. They're the only two states in the United States that have done this, where something called the Senate Bill 188 was passed. Now, this is a bill that makes it illegal to discriminate against the hair of Black women, right? It's a bill that makes it illegal. This only was passed in 2019. 2 states that far have passed that bill. Now, what that must tell you is that you have had generations of Black women from the 1700s who have been told that their hair is not professional, that they will not get jobs. And they're not just told, by the way, it's expressed. I told you about the case of Chastity Jones that was taken to the Supreme Court in America, where she was denied a job because of that hair. And so Black women deciding that we're going to do our hair and relax it, our grandparents saying to us, relax your hair, it's not just them saying this thing out of a vacuum. It is born out of a history of understanding that over the centuries, Black women have been discriminated, have been ignored, and have been denied opportunities on the basis of their hair. So what sounds like it's them saying to us, hate yourself, is in fact, in many ways, them saying to us, in order for you to be in this system, to make money, to be comfortable and so on, you need to do your hair in this particular way, because it is the only way in which the corporate culture is going to accept you. Other than that, corporate culture and corporate aesthetic does not make accommodation for you as a Black person. So it's not just our parents choosing not to, saying that they want to add onto this apartheid and so on and so forth. It's also born out of an experience, a historical reality that Black women have had to endure in the legal space, in the labor market, that has seen them discriminated against on the basis of their hair.
And that is essentially what we talk about when we talk about systemic racism. And it's actually interesting for me, Malaika, that this bill was passed just recently. What is interesting, I think, in fact, is the fact that they have to pass a bill to actually say that. So why don't you just leave us alone? Why do we have to actually create a law, that says you can't discriminate against Black women? Prof, I want to bring you in here. Because these conversations are happening, a lot of people are coming up with products. So products for our hair, and kind of how we make it whatever way we want to make it. And I do understand you also have a range of your own hair products, Nwele. And I really want to talk about, very briefly about that product, but also what we ought to look out for, perhaps from a scientific point of view, to make sure that we don't, as we're all kind of getting our hair the way that we want to, just to make sure that we're not taken for a ride, in other words.
Thank you so much, Nwabisa. Firstly, again, I just want to touch on my previous, the comments made by my previous panel members. I really, like the way they were, especially in Malaika, the history and the science that is bringing in. It is so true. And I couldn't agree with them more about the fact that, normality normal is actually embedded within white normativity. That is so true. And I actually even have an anecdote to share. My son has got natural hair, very thick, what you would refer to as wild hair, but it's not wild hair. It's actually the best way of growing African hair, to just let it grow, don't comb it, because when you comb it, you breaking the hair, and it appears to be a natural haircut. That's one of my colleagues had done a study on that to show that. So he was actually attending a tutorial at UCT as a medical student, and he was attending with his friends in the third group, a white lady student and another African girl. And one of the professors, the consultants, actually told him that your hair is rowdy. This is not trim and proper. And I was actually shocked. And in fact, this doctor doesn't even know that I'm aware of that. But again, it just displayed that what is rowdy, what is untidy, because this is African hair in its natural form. And in its natural form, when it's untouched, it thrives, it grows the best when it's not manipulated. So it is so true. And again, I think Nyaki referred to the standardization of what is normal in schools. Again, you'll find that in schools, you can't have African child's hair trim and proper, because if you comb it and break it, it's going to break. So they can't use the same standards for everybody, because our hair is totally different. And then I also have an example of, in the police department, they are asked to shave their hair because it is expected of them to have short brush hair because they are policemen. But do you know that by doing that, you actually, again, trigger another condition? I'm sure you've seen men with big bumps at the back of their heads, and that's due to shaving clean. And every time I have to write a letter and say, please allow this gentleman to grow their hair, because if you don't, when they keep shaving their hair, they're going to get a condition called acne keloidalis nuki, which is actually triggered by shaving hair clean. So all these aspects are a problem, yeah. So getting back to your question, that's another topic, for another day, in fact, of the products, what is safe, what is not safe, what should people look out for so that they're not taken off by a ride, because now everyone will be making a product for natural hair. There are problems. There could be irritants, there could be allergic contact dermatitis, there could be acne associated with some of these products if they are very oily, because also we need to remember that our hair needs just the right amount of oil. If you put too much, you're going to get something called pomade acne, where you get acne on the forehead, or you can get folliculitis on the scalp. You can also get irritant contact dermatitis if the products are too fragrant or high concentrations of other chemicals. So last point about my hair range, yes, it's called Nwele. We'll be launching it soon. And this range was born out of a lack of products that have been scientifically researched to actually be directed towards African hair, and of course even other ethnicities, because even other ethnicities, they process their hair, they damage their hair, so you need something to repair the hair, as well as we're also doing research. There's a plant that we're looking at which is actually stimulating hair, and it helps in regeneration and growth of the hair, and this is based on the research that we're currently doing. So some of the indigenous plants that we're looking at have shown that they can stimulate hair follicles, and animal studies have been done. Right now, we're working on human studies. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Nyaki, if I may bring you in here. So one of the things I like about when you guys started Natural Hair Company was that you were saying you're not just creating a seat at the table, but you're creating an entirely different table altogether. And so I think it kind of speaks to accessibility and information sharing as far as what to do with our hair. So I want to ask you, how do we even learn? So we all now have kind of woken up to this idea that we actually are enough. And yes, of course, we do need to maintain our hair and all of that. Where do we begin? How do we learn, particularly for people like myself who really have no idea what to do with this, with my in terms of taking care of my hair? What do you guys offer just in terms of information and education for us to understand, what we ought to do with our hair?
So in terms of education, so we are a retailer, but I always tell people that we are process over products. So our main objective, especially like I'm passionate about educating people about taking care of their hair, is learning how to do it. The products come a later stage. You can try and chop and change and use this and, try and use this. But if you don't understand how to take care of your hair, if you don't understand that, you're not supposed to overly manipulate your hair, if you don't understand that you're not supposed to be pulling and stretching and tight wigs and tight weaves and putting glue on the edges of your hair, then you will have no hair to buy products for. So, from our point of view is that we have a full website that's got tons and tons and tons and tons of information. What I love is that, especially now with this natural hair movement, is that people have started creating content based on their past experiences, based on information. I base all of my information, it's not here now, but there's a book called The Science of Black Hair, which I love. It's like research that people that someone's done and gone into the whys of black hair, not only natural hair, but specifically natural hair. But it's mainly about learning how to take care of your hair before you dive into buying products. It's understanding the basics that, our hair is dry, that our hair, it's thirsty, actually. It needs to have water. The only thing that moisturizes your hair is water. And so it's about getting as much water into your hair and sealing that moisture in as best as possible, not overly manipulating, and if you are going to style your hair, which we love, right? We love styling our hair. Fun fact, actually, is that Black women, weaves have been part of Africa since Egypt. Egyptians were wearing weaves in their hair. And so weaves are not a new thing. They're not like an anti-Black thing. They're actually very part of Black culture and Black society, just because of the way that our hair is and, the adornment and the process. A Black lady patented the weave, the tracking system. It was patented by a Black lady. So it's about learning how to take care of your hair in a way that, yes, okay, we love the styling aspect of it, but we also need to learn how to protect our scalps, which is the most important. I think if I was going to do this again, I would become a dermatologist, because I know I would make so much money off Black women. Prof is making so much. I can't. I have conversations with Dr. Koza, who's, I guess, a fellow from a peer of Prof. It's just the amount of education that is missing out of, just traditional education, just basic knowing that you need to wash your hair once a week, at least once a week. Knowing that you mustn't be pulling your hair in tight styles, simple things, being able to go and, to know, Nwabisa, you're saying that you have a patch in your hair. Like, you should already be at the doctor. Like, things like that, where we are, we always, and one of the things that I love us, we love to self-medicate. For whatever reason, it's like, oh no, I've got a hole here. No, just put some castor oil. Or I haven't had hair growing here no, just put tea tree oil, it's fine. And those are the things that I'm like, wait, hold a minute. There are certain things that we can self-medicate, but your skin is an organ. And just like you wouldn't take, some concoction if you had diabetes or you had a heart condition, don't use a concoction for your scalp or for your skin, because the worst thing is if you go to the doctor and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is perfectly treatable, if you had come 6 months ago or if you had come in time. So I think it's just about not being too self-reliant on information out there. So number one is, looking for the information, finding the information and getting as much as you can, but also not being too self-reliant on it's just hair, it's fine. But definitely, seeking medical help.
Okay, I now make a public commitment. I will do so. Please. I've been pressured to do so. I think that for me that hour went by very fast, but I do want to close this by perhaps asking a question to Malika, and the question is really considering how we are now reacting as Black women as societies to incidents, for example, such as the Clicks ad. Do you think that we are making progress in the fight to have ourselves and our bodies and everything about us no longer denigrated? Do you think there is any kind of progress that we are making in that regard?
So, Nwabisa, I do think, I don't regard any form of protest action as being futile, right? Because I do think, I've always said, even back when I was, during the Fees Must Fall movement, a student, I've always said that if we can change the mind, if we go and we protest, and there are 500 students at Rhodes University that don't take the struggle seriously, and out of that 500 students, there's a student who's sitting in their lecture hall, and they say, in their res, and they say, hey, let me just go out and listen to what these people are saying, singing Solomon outside and all of that. If that one student changes their mind, if we can just get to that one student who changes their mind about what they might have deemed an unnecessary struggle, for me that is patently very important. So I do think that one of the things that I love about this outrage that we see, of course, I've got my own criticisms of it, right? The fact that it's so largely very reactive, but it's also so largely, we tend to move away from it very quickly, right? I mean, for example, in February this year, this camp at Kilani Mall did a blackface, right? A mannequin with blackface and so on. And we were upset about that, but people similarly have forgotten about that, right? And we've moved on now to the clicks here, and there'll be something else tomorrow, and so on and so forth. But I always do look at these things as packets of consciousness that begin to rise in the minds of Black people, right? That consciousness and political, political consciousness is not something that happens to everyone at the same time. But the more and more that we begin to see people begin to question, I mean, there was a time when things like this, cliques could get away with doing things like this 20 years ago, 15 years ago, because no one was saying anything that much, right? The fact that today, when you do something like this, you are going to be called to account has forced a lot of companies to think very deeply about the way in which they do things. And some of them will still continue because it's been normalized over many centuries that this is how you look at Black people. They are not human beings. They are not civilized. They are all of these things. They're in a zone of non-being and so on. But the fact that we are beginning to see a lot of companies beginning to question themselves, even companies, for example, that want to bring issues of inclusion and so on, they do it, and they've got this transformation policies and so on, and they do it obviously very opportunistically, and some of them do it to get money out of it, like Nike with their hijabs and so on and so forth. But the very fact that conversations around the need for transformation are beginning to find expression in our day-to-day discourse, that companies are beginning to see the necessity for that to happen, is for me an indication. It's a product not of the moral conscience of those companies, but it's a product of this consistent and perpetual protest through words, through action, through hashtags, through directly being on the streets picketing and so on. That is an indication of something that is changing in the minds of society. We must at all times continue to agitate, because it's the only way in which we are going to sharpen the contradictions, right? There's no struggle that's going to be won immediately. We need to constantly sharpen the contradictions to say, you are going to be held accountable if you do or say something like this. You will not continue to say something like this. And we are going to then force these companies, we are going to shame them into transforming, because no company is transforming out of the goodness of their heart. And let's make no mistake, there has never been throughout history an occasion where the oppressor has been appealed to, the oppressed have been able to appeal to the moral conscience of the oppressor, and they did things because they just felt it was a bad thing to do. But when people sharpen contradictions, when people demand to have their rightful place in humanity, you leave them no choice but to make that demand. And once they make that demand, you are basically fighting against an idea whose time has come. And I think that's what we are seeing in South Africa. That's what we are seeing around the world. Why the race question has found expression all over again is that Black people are at a point where we are tired, we can't breathe, and we are saying that this is not normal and things cannot continue. And some people might want to turn a blind ear to that, a deaf ear to that, and not hear what we are saying. But no one is ignoring this rise of the movement of Black women, of Black people, saying that we are human and we demand our place in the rightful place in the human race. And I think it's not lost, Nwabisa. It's not lost. We are getting somewhere.
Absolutely, and I think for me the one of the big things is really to agitate enough to change the institutional cultures that really can then give rise to the kind of ads that we've really kind of seen, and the kind of expression of racism that we've seen for so many years. Ladies, thank you so much. I do think that hour went by very fast. Thank you, Malaika Mahlatsi, Sowetan columnist. Thank you to Nyaki Chabango. Thank you to Dr. Nozadlova for really what I thought was an insightful conversation. And thank you at home, wherever you're watching us, whatever platform you're watching us. Thank you for engaging with us, and thank you for supporting us in everything we do as the Sowetan Women's Club. Let's keep these conversations going. Myself, Nwabisa Makunga, editor of the Sowetan, Ndiabulela. Thank you very much, and take care of your hair. Bye.